Okay, if everybody could find their seat and committee members could get up here and find their seats. I don't know if my mic is working or not. I guess it is.
Oh, it is on. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to call this meeting of the Blue Ribbon Study Committee for Education Performance Metrics and Workforce Stability, which is I still think that is quite a mouthful. We're going to call that to order. Representative Rice, would you open us up in a word of prayer, please?
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for each person in this room and their invested interest in our students and Georgia's future. And I pray that you give us wisdom and clarity and direction in this committee as we move forward for the best of our students and our educators. In your name I pray. Amen.
Thank you so much. Last time we had a great first opening session of this study committee, and I think two of our key takeaways that I want the committee and everybody to keep in mind as we go forward is, yes, we are talking about metrics and how we assess, but we must remember that all of these metrics are students. We are not talking about numbers, we are talking about people. So let's keep that in mind. And the last piece of advice that we got at that last study committee meeting was, let's make sure before we do anything in this process that we measure what we want to measure and we understand what we want to measure, and we do that accurately. So as we go on today, I want to recognize Dr. Matt Thompson, who's the Deputy Superintendent from the Barrow County School System, and Jenny Persinger, Director of Data, Assessment, and Accountability with the Barrow School System. And y'all can come up to the podium. I think we've got you keyed up on your... And y'all can start whenever you are ready.
Great, perfect. Thank you so much. Like she said, I'm Jenny Persinger. I'm Director of Data Assessment and Accountability for the Barrow County School System, and I have with me Dr. Matt Thompson, our Deputy Superintendent. We just are thankful to Chair Lady Ballard for inviting us today. We are here to share Barrow's perspective on CCRPI. We appreciate the opportunity, and we want to build on the information that you heard before. We made sure that we are not repeating all that same information. We're trying to build on that so that we can move forward. So, as you know, CCRPI is one of the most visible ways that Georgia has to communicate school performance to the public, and the intent is important. We want our families, our educators, communities, and policymakers to have clear information on, are we preparing our students for the future? The challenge is that it's difficult to understand, and it doesn't always lead directly to actionable improvement, which is where we're trying to head. So the key question, let me move us forward. There we go. The key question is not whether accountability matters. Of course, we know it does. The question is whether our current CCRPI system gives us the kind of information we need to improve our schools. A strong accountability system should be understandable to the public, timely enough for us to make decisions, and fair enough to recognize both the achievement and growth of our students.
So we thought one way to start out this discussion is to talk about what law already requires at both the federal and the state level in terms of accountability for the state of Georgia and other states. And so we're going to start talking about the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is federal legislation. And at this point, what I want to preface is we're going to say some things about CCRPI where we think there are some things that could be improved, some deficiencies, but we do want to acknowledge at the outset that a lot of this is federally mandated. And I can tell you, because the version at least I have access to, the Godot may have different ones, is about 170 pages of very fine print regulations of what has to go into every state's accountability system, coupled with a complicated series of waivers that can be sought. That's a heavy lift for any department that's trying to comply with that. And additionally, I have some experience building smaller scale accountability models internally. Just building at that scale, you're talking about balancing a lot of competing needs, making sure it's comprehensible, making sure your calculations are dependable. It's a heavy lift. So when we give this criticism and feedback, it's done in the spirit of trying to make it better, not to recognize that there's not a tremendous amount of work that goes into building these models. At the federal level, among the highlights, states are required to have measures of academic achievement, academic progress and growth, English language proficiency for English learners, graduation rate, a minimum of one indicator of student success. Georgia actually requires in its accountability model considerably more additional indicators than most states do. It requires a process by which schools are sorted into different categories of needing comprehensive support and improvement or targeted support and improvement, meaning more or less support based on lower performance. This is important, and Ms. Persinger will cover this in detail in a second. Results are required to be published by December 31st of each year, and states must set long-term goals and interim benchmarks. I will also say, I mentioned the waiver process. One of the things we are appreciative to the Department of Education was after the September 4th shooting, they did seek waivers from accountability for Appalachia High School. Were not granted by the U.S. Department of Education, but we do appreciate that they sought those on our behalf. Georgia law is blessedly simpler. OCGA 2014-33 is about a page and a half. It is actually directed at GOES, formerly Governor's Office of Student Achievement, but it mentions that Godot has to have a role in this. This is going to be a consistent theme we're going to touch on, or where having two different departments be involved in this creates a lot of differential incentives, a lot of things where I don't think the parents, the district level folks, are getting what they need because you have two different departments that are trying to manage the same process. State law requires a single accountability framework. It mandates measures for student achievement, school performance, as well as school climate and financial efficiency. So question that came up in the last was, where does school climate live? Under the law, that lives under GOES, even though it is actually calculated by the Office of Whole Child Supports at Godot. And this is where we get into the law requires that school climate, financial efficiency, and school accountability all be calculated together. There is no web page in the state of Georgia you can go on and get all of that information at one time, and Ms. Persinger will cover this a little bit later. If you want to see school climate and overall CCRPI scores and single scores, you can go to Godot's website. If you want to see financial efficiency, you have to go to the GOES website. And GOES is actually who calculates the single score, which means you don't get the single score until about 3 or 4 months after the CCRPI has already been released. And that is just not an efficient model for anybody who's a parent, a stakeholder, a policymaker trying to understand this. And so that's a point we're going to come back to quite a bit. Under OCGA 2014-27, the results of the single score that GOES calculates has to be used for the Promise Scholarship. One of the things state law does not require is a specific formula for accountability scores, a specific domain weighting approach, what the annual subgroup improvement targets are, or a specific school rating methodology beyond the 0 to 100. And that's important because in both of these areas, what you want is state and federal policymakers to create what we want to measure, what we value, different things about how it's reported to our families, to our teachers, but you want to allow the experts to actually build those models and be flexible enough that they're not having to wait on the legislature to make tweaks to the model. So that's actually appropriate in that regard.
So when we look at the single score, that's obviously easy to communicate, and 0 to 100 translates to parents as a grade. Now, I'm sorry that Representative Martin and our statistics expert is not here, but we know that in statistics, really 50 is average, but that's also not really how these scores work. So it's a complex picture, and if the public is only seeing one score, do they know what's driving that score? Is it student achievement? Is it student growth? Is it subgroup numbers? Is it readiness for future? It's kind of hard to see when you just wrap it all into one single score. For accountability to support improvement, it needs to make the story behind that score clear and easier to understand. So part of my role in our school system is I actually work with our school and district leaders to try to help them understand, what is this number? It's not something that happens to you. Where does it come from? What you do every day with students translate into where the impact is in these numbers. But it's a chore. I live it every day and breathe it every day, but then when I'm trying to explain to that kindergarten teacher what you're doing with those kindergartners to help them get build their reading skills, their literacy skills, where does that eventually translate into the CCRPI score? And then, like Carmen Rice asked at the previous meeting about the climate scores, that obviously is an important part of a picture of a school. And we do get a star rating, but it doesn't impact the 0 to 100 score anywhere. So that's not translated here. So again, the timing matters. When districts receive the final results is after many school year decisions have already been made. We start pretty much in January of one school year already planning for our staffing for the next school year, so that we can look at what does that scheduling look like, so that we can put together the budget and that schools can write their school improvement plans. So then after that is when we get all these results and the supporting data that goes with it. So it kind of makes it hard, makes it more reflective than it does actionable at that point. Earlier access to maybe some preliminary calculations would be helpful, or some just of the component level data if we can't get the whole picture. Some clear modeling tools would be helpful. It would help us put those accountability results into our school planning for the next year. So we did a little bit of looking at the public release and timing across multiple states, and you can see where I've highlighted Georgia in green, where we fall out of the 35 states that we could identify. Georgia was 22nd, and some states have gone to putting into state law that those have to be released earlier in the school year so that they can be effective. But even if you look at, it's currently, we've just passed August 15th, which is when that first state that we knew got results, but it's still at the beginning of a school year. If you're waiting until, in our case, November, some cases even past the midpoint of a school year to know last year's results, that makes it really hard to take any action on those. And then, like Dr. Thompson referred to, there are different needs to have comparisons for accountability. Part of S's requirement is that some federally identified schools are listed from our accountability system. And so in Georgia, we have the comprehensive support and improvement list, the targeted support and improvement list, the additional targeted support and improvement list, and those are all based on comparisons to other systems. So that's nothing I can predict. When I'm in the data every day, I know what my numbers are, but of course I don't know what any other districts are, so I can't compare to know how our schools are doing. My schools could be showing great improvement, but we're hoping schools across the state are showing improvement, and if mine didn't improve as much as someone else's, we still end up on these lists, which is very disheartening to teachers who have seen the numbers go up.
Representative Alaya has a quick question for y'all.
Thank you, Chair Lady. Jenny, quick question. It was mentioned at our last meeting that most of the data is compiled end of school year, so May, June timeframe. What's a realistic turnaround given summertime, folks are traveling, staff are out of the school? What's a realistic turnaround time for synthesizing and then reporting out those outcomes?
So the data all is at that point in the hands of the Department of Education. So that might be a question for when Dr. Timberlake is up of what that realistically could look like. But they're the ones that were then waiting to give us the data. And so that's more in their department. But that's a great question. And then finally, that last row there is about the Promise Scholarship, which is something put into legislation. And then you can see at the end that that's calculated by yet a different department using these same scores, and again is comparison to how other districts are doing. So I can't, they talked about the closing gaps measure and how much it swings back and forth, so it could totally impact one school being on that Georgia School Promise list, but then the next year, because of those gap movements, they'd come off the list, then they could go back on the list. So that part is very frustrating to teachers when they're working to move forward the whole time and they can't predict where they're going to end up.
Representative Silcox. has a question.
Yes, I was just curious, do you think there's any practical way to move this up? I mean, I know a lot of people move at the end of the school year, right? So it would be nice if they were going to invest their life savings into a new home, if they could get those scores, over the summer for sure.
Well, to be clear, we do have a lot of the data that underlies CCRPI much earlier than the public release. We will have milestones results in May. In this case, what Ms. Persinger is referring to is how so much of accountability is relative to other schools, and so until we get the entire view of data, we really don't know where we're situated. There's a current process we do through accountability where we're going through something called assessment matching, cohort withdrawal. Yes.
So it doesn't really seem reasonable to me that everyone should have to wait until everyone has the numbers. The schools should be able to release it as soon as they have it.
I think there's a concern. We certainly, there's a lot of process, and like I said, Dr. Timberlake will speak to this, but there's a lot of work they have to do to verify data are accurate. We get preliminary data. Sometimes it can change, typically doesn't, but sometimes there are issues that happen within the testing itself or the data. If you look at graduation rate, there's a lot of work that has to be done to make sure that all the students that were marked at the end of the year as graduated or dropped out, that data are accurate, and schools have a chance to change data that are inaccurate, because if we're going to hold them accountable, the data need to be accurate. We sign off on all that at the end of August, and then there is a gap on a typical year of several months, 2 or 3 months, to get to when that's publicly released. And I understand there's a lot of work that is done by Godot to get that put together. What I can just tell you is there are states that get this out faster. Whether they have invested more in doing that quicker, they have different processes, I could not tell you. I do think it is certainly achievable under ESSA to have your accountability ratings released much earlier than we currently do. But can that be done with the current capacity? That's not a question Ms. Persinger or I can answer, but it's certainly one we would like to see discussed, because the earlier we get those results, the more they become actionable and not reactive.
How early did the other states get it out?
There's a table a couple slides back. I think the earliest state we identified was Texas, which is August 15th. Wyoming, August, I put my glasses on, August 28th, and so on and so forth. Okay. There are states that are later than we are, and again, ESSA only requires December 31st.
Thank you.
So
one more
yes,
question. Representative Lupton, is that?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. This is somewhat along the same lines. If we've got GOES giving promise scholarship information out to families and parents based on basically it's a different department, but you're using the same score. When is that released to the public?
So
when is that promise scholarship list released?
It's I believe it's typically in January. Am I correct on that, Jenny? But
so it's the following January from the school year before.
Correct.
January comes the score, so I'm going to send my kid to another school next year based on a score that came out in January that was based on the year before.
And I will also say they have to release the list of who's eligible, the actual underlying data where you can see how, was I at the 23rd percentile, was I at the 15th percentile? That typically is much later. I had to special request that from GOES around February or March. I don't think it was publicly available until much later. Now, that may change. I don't want to assume it won't, but it was, in some cases, almost a year later before I can get the underlying data to even show you what I'm about to show you, which is how this is actually distributed.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
So Houston County did a very, very good job of explaining some of the challenges with CCRPI. We want to give a different perspective on one, and then we want to enhance on another. They mentioned, they have a lot of high-performing students, and they have difficulty showing growth on the growth metric. And I think I'm not I'm a psychometrist who can evaluate if that's accurate or not, but it tracks to me. That experience tracks to me. If you have a higher-performing student, even with a relativistic growth model, I could see where that could be challenging for them to show consistent growth. But I want to show the other side of that equation. Unfortunately, there is going to be some statistics, so if you can go back to your high school or college statistics course, you'll remember between any two variables, you can calculate a correlation coefficient that is between -1 and 1, And basically it shows how strong the relationship between those two things are. So if you're -1, you're perfectly inversely correlated to where you can just literally rank one off the other. If you're +1, it's the opposite in the positive direction. What you're looking at is from 2025, the content mastery score for every single elementary, middle, and high school in Georgia. Elementary is blue, middle is red, orange is high. And what you are looking at is the correlation between each school's poverty level and their content mastery rate. And what you're looking at is a correlation of -0.83 for elementary, -0.88 for middle, and -0.79 for high school. These are staggeringly high correlations. That means you can build a very simple statistical model and you can predict with a very high degree of accuracy where a school will score simply based on the students it serves. Now, demography is not destiny, and schools make a huge difference in the lives of students that come from challenging backgrounds. But if we are attempting to do what Georgia law says and evaluate the quality of learning, we have to take into consideration the backgrounds of the students that they are being attempted to serve. Not every teacher has the same students. Not every school is dealing with the same populations. What is nice is there are other measures involved in CCRPI that are less responsive to this. So if you look at the correlations of progress to poverty, there is still a relationship, -3.8, -3.7, and -4.1 respectively, but that is a much different relationship where you can show schools that maybe have students that come in that have lower native reading levels. They may be serving more English learners. They may be serving students that do not have the familial support that others do, but they can still make progress towards proficiency. And the beautiful thing is, if you make high levels of progress over multiple years, proficiency will inevitably follow. But in this case, that relationship between these things that schools cannot control, which is the quality, which is the communities they serve, and the metrics that come out of that, a accountability model that is fair has to be able to balance both of those things, because the goal for every student is proficiency, but not every student is as easy to get to proficiency. This is not, by the way, unknown. This is one of the most established facts in all of education research. This is a white paper published by formerly the Governor's Office of Student Achievement. Now it's GOES, showing the exact same thing from 2024. Same correlations, it's pretty much same data, just not CCRPI milestones. I will tell you, GOES has a model they have calculated for many years called Beating the Odds. That is a statistical model that looks at if a particular student, based on the students they serve, is outperforming what you would expect, underperforming, or right about level. During COVID, they stopped calculating it. They recently released the 2025 scores in May, and I think I may be one of the very few people who has realized they actually did it, because I found it buried in their website. I've not seen a press release. It's not part of any conversation in education. It just sort of exists, and it's extremely useful data that gives a really important perspective on how our schools are performing. And as best I can tell, it's just buried on a website. And that gets at what we're going to talk about a little later, which is how accountability, who owns it, how that's communicated, and how departments work together. And I'm sure some of them will have very good reasons for those. This is not me attempting to say, there's not good reasons for some of this. This is me saying, as an end user at a district level and as a parent of Georgia public school students, I think these are important things that we should be looking at. States attempt to balance this equation by differentially weighting different components. So what you're looking at here are the 35 states in our sample. The ones at the top in green tend to weight content mastery higher than growth. The ones at the bottom in blue tend to weight progress more than content mastery. Georgia falls right in the middle of that distribution. It's a little different at high school because they have an extra measure, but for elementary, middle, progress is weighted about 5% more than proficiency. So the question we would raise is, if we're trying to do what OCGA says in terms of assessing the quality of learning, do we have that right balance between expecting proficiency but also understanding the difference in the underlying nature of communities that schools are attempting to serve? Houston also talked a lot about closing the gaps. They spent a lot of time talking about that measure, and they spent a lot of times focusing on how that bounces around between years. So you have schools who maybe are 100 on closing the gaps one year, but due to the way the subgroups targets are calculated and based on several factors, it can drop down to 0 or 5 the very next year. We agree with every bit of that. We wanted to share a little bit more, so unfortunately I have to explain another statistical concept, which is, if you remember the box and whisker plot, but I'll make this nice and easy for everybody. What you're looking at is, in 2025, the elementary CCRPI scores for every school in the state, spread out. If you're on the far left, it's 0 to 100 scale for each of these. What you can see, each of those blue dots is a school, how much more spread out the closing gaps measure is on the very bottom than any other measure. Progress, content mastery, readiness, anything else measured, you can see in those boxes, by the way, that's called the interquartile range, fun fact, or not fun fact, depending on your perspective. That's where 50% of schools fall, is in that box. And you can see how much wider that particular quartile range is for closing gaps. Schools are all over the map statewide, and when you correlate each of the metrics within there, closing the gaps really doesn't have as much relationship as you would expect with content mastery or progress. It is just, to us, it appears statistically artifactual, which means we're not sure where it's coming from in some cases, or it's an artifact of the way it's particularly calculated. So what we wanted to do is to focus on that as what we think could be done about that. One of the ways, like Ohio, for example, has a model where when they look at subgroup performance, they don't just look at proficiency, they give a multi-level. You first look at proficiency. If they didn't hit that target, did they show high growth? And that enables you to have the ability to show multiple ways that a particular subgroup is performing where you would want them to be. Houston mentioned this, and we agree, using a multi-year rolling average, so 1 year is not the only factor in there. That would reduce some of this. Focus on the lowest performing. Some states just use the bottom 25% of students, irrespective of subgroups. They report subgroups, but they don't include them in the calculations for overall score. This is the big one to us. ESSA says the subgroup size minimum standard is about 30, that you need 30 kids in a subgroup. Georgia chooses 15. When you're using 15, it's the law of small numbers. Single kids, yes?
Are there some schools that can't even meet that 15 person subgroup?
In terms of they don't have...
Like these are really small rural districts?
Yes, I'm sure there are. I mean, typically, like, I mean, gender, male, female is one, so you're definitely going to have that.
Okay.
But also, like, you know, between your ethnicities, African American, Hispanic, you will typically see those. A lot of times, you don't see that with English learners. We may have whole counties that don't have any any subgroups that qualify for English learners. Special ed may depend on the size of the school, etc. But 15 is a very, very small number. When Godot talks about this, their perspective is we're not looking at cohorts. We're looking at performance over time. So does this third grade at this school consistently produce? Does this third to fifth grade band produce on there? But when you drop it down to 15, and when you consider that students may be in more than one subgroup, you can have a student who's Hispanic, economically disadvantaged, and special education, and male. And so that particular student may hit 4 subgroups. 15 is a very low number, and that kind of statistical variance it brings in can be challenging. Our thought is moving that closer to the ESSA standard of 30 still means we're looking at that data. We're still ensuring that there are not achievement gaps in our school systems, but at the same time, it's recognizing when you've dropped the number that low, you're bringing a lot of artificial variance in. And I understand probably there's some formula that's used to say 15 is acceptable, but to us, in terms of what we're seeing in the underlying data, we think 30, somewhere in that vicinity, would probably make a lot more sense. We don't advocate this, but it is fair to say ESSA requires that, and the same as the state law requires that subgroup gaps be looked at. It doesn't require they actually be a specific measure like closing gaps. We could do something totally different. But those are our recommendations on closing gaps.
Now you know why I said I was sad that Representative Martin wasn't here to hear all the statistics. So again, the accountability system requires public trust. When the responsibility for producing and communicating those results is divided, I know in the district people are asking me, so who's calculating this? Who do we go to when we have questions? Are we going to DOE? Are we going to GOES? So I think that part we could definitely do some clearing up, but I think that would require some action on your part. To make that more consistent, that communication more transparent, which I think is important to the public. And like Dr. Thompson was saying, when those federal identified lists come out, or when the Georgia Promise School, like Representative Lupton was asking, come out, we're halfway through another school year and making decisions and then putting schools on plans for data that happened 18 months ago, possibly. So that part is also a little frustrating, and some of that is because of who's calculating which part and where it's coming from and when it's being released. So we also thought it was important to talk about early literacy and where it falls in our current CCRPI system. We know that the legislature has had a great focus on early literacy, as we feel is important as well. I don't know the answer here. I don't know the best way to measure it. Right now we're using third grade milestones results, and would fair to say most schools would tell you that's not the most accurate. We do have some. We've put in these early literacy diagnostics and screeners. Those are not necessarily achievement. They're screeners, diagnostics to tell us where students need help. This also goes back to the communities we serve. There are some communities where students are coming to kindergarten prepared for kindergarten, and there's lots of systems where those children are not coming already prepared to start that curriculum. So I'm not saying I have the answer to that, but I'm saying it is something I think we need to look at, is how would we measure early literacy? How would that fit into a accountability system, which I feel is important. Again, we've put some other things that other systems or other states are doing. A whole assessment, if we had a whole another assessment, that also takes a lot of time and energy. Our district was involved for many years trying to work with the Department of Education and some other systems to develop an alternate assessment to the milestones. And we never got anywhere with it. We didn't have the support we needed. It's a huge undertaking.
At our very last meeting, we are going to talk a little bit to our early childhood friends and talk about some of those getting ready for kindergarten things.
Perfect.
But I think Representative Silcox has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Was just curious, is it true that y'all still use, or the third grade statistics are used to determine how many prison beds we are going to build out for the future?
That is my understanding.
Okay. And so given the significance of that, I think, I agree with you. I think we definitely need earlier literacy rigor and testing and evaluation. Do you think that there's a direct correlation with the kids who attend pre-K and those who do not in terms of preparation for kindergarten?
My kindergarten teachers would tell you yes. They can tell who's been in a school setting previous to starting kindergarten and those who have not.
Okay, thank you.
But I will say this is a space where assessment comes in as well. We've been talking a lot about accountability, but to bring early literacy in, you have to talk about how that is assessed. And the current model under the current literacy laws that have passed gives districts flexibility, which we appreciate within research-based instruments, research-based curricula, but that does mean the comparability then becomes a challenge. So all of these things are interlocked, and if you think we're up here giving easy answers, we don't have them. We're just trying to give the perspective of a district about where when we're held accountable for something, it can be challenging.
Representative Alaye.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm still hung up on that correlation slide with it's just an astonishing relationship that I don't think is a surprise to anyone up here, how closely related poverty is to achievement. We just talked about early childhood literacy efforts. Those are great. At the school district and classroom level, what resources or supports are you receiving to reverse that trend? And I should say, what additional resources can we be providing to help you in those efforts?
That's a good question. I can't say there are organizations doing good work. A lot of times in local communities, like I can just think in our community, we have various groups that work with early literacy initiatives. They're sometimes tied to churches, or they may be an organization that is just founded locally where they're trying to get books in the hands of individuals that maybe don't have books in their home, or they have indigent needs. There are churches that are partnering with our school system to host things over the summer to where they can get tutoring. We've had a variety of different things that are happening, but I don't know that I would call any of it systematic. It tends to be more community-based and more trying to solve problems at a community level, which there's a lot to say that for. I don't think every problem necessarily is a state problem, but I do think when the accountability system is state-based and it is so sensitive to community conditions that vary a lot across Georgia, that has to be baked into the design of those accountability models very carefully.
At the systems level, though, what types of investments would you want? We don't regularly get to hear from folks on
Sure.
the ground doing the work, so it's helpful insight for us going into next session to provide some focus around which investments are actually going to move the
Yeah,
needle.
I think the early literacy thing is on everyone's radar because it, as the question came up, it sets the tone for so much. If you can get a student by third grade reading proficiently, you have opened up avenues for later teachers, for later instruction that just aren't closed off. And you know, there are absolutely kids who are not reading on grade level in third grade who end up doing just fine. But statistically, those early years are so crucial that I think districts are attempting to put more of our resources in early literacy, early pre-K, trying to make sure we're identifying students that are falling behind using some of the models that come through the literacy of screening, intervention, multiple tiers of support. I mean, we're doing the things that schools do. Some schools will have to do more or less depending on who they serve, but it's a challenge. And I can't speak to all of it because I can only speak to my county that I've been in for 20 some odd years. But I can promise you the early literacy focus that has been such a signal out of the legislature. All of us see that, all of us know that, all of us are living that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So again, just to wrap up, we were able to kind of lay out 5 priorities that we think would make CCRPI more useful, making it easier for the public to understand, not something that is my entire job to sit and understand, but that anyone looking at it would understand where those numbers are coming from. The timeliness, as we said, to help us make some earlier decisions, a little bit of that fairness based on putting progress, maybe more weighted, again, like we said, some of the community, taking into account the communities being served, that volatility that goes back and forth with the closing gaps measure, and then making the governance clear. Who owns this? Where's it being published from? Where can people go to find it? Which website is it buried in? That type of thing. So again, we know that accountability is not easy, but we'd like for it to be actionable so that we can continue to make improvement with our schools. We feel like that's important to our educators, our families, and then to you as the policymakers. So we appreciate the opportunity to come share with you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you. We appreciate y'all for coming.
Thank you very much.
We're running just a little ahead of schedule. I love to say those words. Do we have any superintendents or representatives from other districts that just would like to come up and just say anything? I love to put y'all on the spot, don't I? You can agree, disagree. We can get all spicy about it. A brave person. Come on. Yeah, we've got about 10 extra minutes, so. And if you'll just please tell us who you are and who you're with.
Good morning. I am Rachel Hazel. I am with the Treat County School System. I'm the proud superintendent of that. I brought the team with me, though. This is my assistant superintendent of curriculum and professional development and director of accountability. And I'm going to let them get more into the weeds, but I think we would say ditto to just about everything. I think they did an excellent job. Barrow County has a lot to be proud of, so thank you for putting into words what a lot of us are talking about around the table.
Don't be shy.
Well, thank you. We just appreciate the opportunity here to come and to continue the conversation and to listen and to learn. And so we recognize what some of the challenges and things that you face and what we experience on the ground. So just having the opportunity to learn and hear from our counterparts is very helpful, and some pieces that we can take back to share with our teams and kind of our thinking and planning moving forward.
Thank you.
I'm going to pick you up, but I do want to say one thing that comes to mind was that I appreciate very much the discussion about early literacy, because that is very much, and any funding or anything that can be put behind that will be very helpful. Our county is experiencing something very similar to what you described, where we have a lot of organizations that are very interested in supporting early literacy, and we as a school system are trying to align all of that support so that all of our students across the county can benefit, and not just in certain geographic areas.
All
Okay. I don't really have anything to add. Just I'm thankful to be here, and I have participated in the GAP meeting, so I've heard a little bit of this before, and we are seeing the same things in Troup County. So we appreciate y'all taking the time to take a look at it and letting us be here to learn. Thank you.
Thank you for coming and participating. Okay, next on our agenda is Dr. Allison Timberlake, the Deputy Superintendent for Assessment and Accountability for the Georgia Department of Education. And you have a mouthful of a title to tell people when they ask what do you do?
I do. I'm everyone's favorite person. Who doesn't love the assessment and accountability person? While we get this started, thank you to our colleagues in Barrow and Troup for sharing such thoughtful, insightful comments on CCRPI. Always appreciate the opportunity in forums like this to talk about our work. So, Madam Chair and members of the study committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Superintendent Woods wishes he could be here as well, but as I think you're aware, he is attending a regularly scheduled State Board of Education meeting. My name is Allison Timberlake, and I'm currently the Deputy Superintendent for Assessment and Accountability at the Georgia Department of Education. In my 15 years at the department, I've had the privilege of being involved directly in many of the laws, conversations, and decisions that have shaped Georgia's accountability system over that time. As a legislator, I'm sure you've gotten plenty of calls from parents, superintendents, and other constituents who believe their school's accountability score doesn't fully reflect the work happening inside their school. They likely told you about their dedicated teachers, their special programs, and the improved student outcomes that they feel are not necessarily reflected in those scores. Or they told you about the challenges they face that they believe may not be captured in that data. And those calls raise important questions. What should we measure, and how should we hold ourselves accountable for providing a quality education to every student in Georgia? Today, I'd like to spend a few minutes walking you through the evolution of CCRPI, the federal and state laws that influenced its design, and how Georgia's priorities are reflected in the measures that are included today. And finally, I will just leave you with a few guiding principles for accountability that I hope the committee will find helpful as you review education performance metrics. To provide some context for CCRPI, I would like to just briefly tell you about 3 Georgia schools. In the southeast corner of Georgia, located near Kings Bay Naval Base, more than 2,500 students attend Camden County High School. The school offers an extraordinary range of opportunities, including 42 career pathways, 95 career courses, dual enrollment partnerships, and a youth apprenticeship program. Students can explore interest and build skills through multiple programs, choose from more than 20 advanced placement courses, and participate in 23 varsity sports. The school is also recognized for its strong special education program among military families stationed at Kings Bay. Camden County High reflects the needs, the strengths, and the aspirations of its community, and it's one example of the many ways that Georgia schools prepare students for success. In Augusta, home of the Masters Tournament and rich traditions in art and culture, Davidson Fine Arts Magnet School offers a very different educational experience. Established in 1981, Davidson is a public magnet school in Richmond County, serving over 800 students in grades 6 through 12. Admission is based upon prior academic performance, good character, and an audition in music, dance, drama, art, and creative writing. If you walk through its halls, you'll find talented young musicians rehearsing performances, actors preparing for productions, dancers refining their craft, artists creating original works, and writers developing their voices. Davidson demonstrates how a public school can cultivate artistic talent while maintaining high academic expectations. Davidson is another example of how Georgia schools meet the unique needs of students in different ways. And in the northwest corner of Georgia in Dalton, Phoenix High School serves students whose educational journeys have not always followed a traditional path. As a special purpose high school, Phoenix provides students age 16 and older with opportunities for credit recovery, credit acceleration, and a pathway to graduation. At Phoenix, every student has an individualized graduation plan designed around their unique needs, goals, and circumstances. Students can take advantage of dual enrollment and work-based learning opportunities through local partnerships, helping them connect their education to college and career opportunities beyond high school. Phoenix High School's story is a reminder that great schools are not defined by a single model, but by their ability to meet students where they are and help them reach their full potential. Camden, Davidson, and Phoenix serve different students, pursue different missions, and define success in different ways. Yet all three are preparing students for life beyond high school, which raises an important question. How do we measure that? Accountability is about holding ourselves accountable for the opportunities, experiences, and outcomes we provide to students, while recognizing that excellence can look different from one community to the next, without stifling schools' abilities to be unique, to innovate, and to meet the needs of their communities. In Georgia, that framework, as you know, is the College and Career Ready Performance Index, or CCRPI. The purpose of CCRPI is to provide an objective measure of the extent to which schools, districts in the state are succeeding in providing high-quality opportunities and outcomes for students. It strives to promote transparency, access to a high-quality education, and continuous improvement while satisfying both state and federal requirements. Accountability systems are often complex because the results are used for a lot of different purposes, and many of those purposes carry significant consequences. Educators use results to identify strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities for improvement. Families and communities use them to understand how schools are performing, and state leaders use them to make policy decisions, allocate resources, and identify schools that may need support. And in some cases, accountability results may inform personnel evaluations or trigger formal actions. The goal is to have a common framework to recognize and measure success across all schools while respecting the qualities that make each school and community distinct. The challenge of accountability is not deciding what is important in one school. It's deciding what is important enough that every school in Georgia should be accountable for it. Accountability systems operate within a framework of federal law, stakeholder values, and technical requirements. So before we talk a little bit more about CCRPI itself, it's important to understand those frameworks that shape it. My colleagues already talked about federal accountability requirements, so I will just briefly mention that the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, does include several important accountability requirements. States must measure academic achievement, student growth, graduation rates, progress toward English language proficiency, and at least one indicator of school quality or student success. Those indicators must be valid, reliable, comparable, statewide, and capable of meaningfully differentiating school performance. States must report results for all students and all subgroups, place substantially greater emphasis on academic indicators than non-academic indicators, and identify schools requiring additional support and improvement. And then Georgia law requires the state to annually establish and review indicators of school performance that measure quality of learning, school climate, and financial efficiency. Quality of learning indicators must include measures of student achievement, achievement gap closure, and student progress, and must be combined into a single 0 to 100 school and district score with student achievement carrying the greatest weight. Georgia statutory requirements align closely with ESSA, and it allows us to operate a single accountability system that satisfies both state and federal law. Changes in federal law help explain many of the design decisions that shaped Georgia's accountability system over time. Under No Child Left Behind and AYP, accountability was largely limited to reading and math achievement. When Georgia received an ESEA flexibility waiver in 2012, extensive stakeholder input led to the development of CCRPI, a broader accountability system designed to capture multiple dimensions of school performance. Following the passage of ESSA in 2015, Georgia again engaged stakeholders to refine CCRPI. Stakeholder committees met many times over the course of a year to define a theory of action for CCRPI that included defining the vision, purpose, goals, intended uses, and intended outcomes. The committee evaluated indicators for alignment with the theory of action, state and federal requirements, and technical properties. National experts reviewed and vetted the redesigned CCRPI, and the U.S. Department of Education ultimately reviewed and approved the redesigned CCRPI in Georgia's ESSA state plan. There was a time when CCRPI was constantly changing. The first CCRPI reports in 2012 were complex. Between 2012 and 2017, that complexity resulted in annual changes due to phased rollouts of specified indicators, policy changes, GOSA recommendations, legislation, data collection constraints, and assessment system changes. One of the main goals of the CCRPI redesign under ESSA was to create a more stable CCRPI, specifically to avoid annual changes. In fact, since 2018 under ESSA, changes require an amendment to our state's ESSA plan, which includes a public comment period and approval by the U.S. Department of Education. Changes have been made to CCRPI twice since 2018. First, CCRPI was substantially but temporarily impacted by pandemic-related data limitations beginning in 2020. Then, following the pandemic in 2023, USED approved a set of updates proposed in response to stakeholder feedback. The updates were designed to improve alignment with current Georgia priorities, such as the Georgia Early Literacy Act and high-demand pathways, incorporate additional opportunities to demonstrate success, such as through Cambridge courses and ASVAB scores, incorporate alternate assessment results in some indicators as required by USED, and account for temporary impacts on closing gaps calculations when new standards and assessments were implemented in math and ELA. These updates did not change the CCRPI components or the indicators. They were designed to provide additional opportunities for students to meet those indicators, helping improve fairness with minimal impact on year-to-year comparability. Those stakeholder working committees spent countless hours wrestling with a fundamental question. What are the outcomes that every school in Georgia should be accountable for, regardless of its mission, model, or student population? They evaluated indicators, reviewed impact analyses, considered technical quality, and debated what truly mattered for all students. Those outcomes became the framework for CCRPI, increasing student achievement, closing achievement gaps, strengthening literacy and numeracy, improving post-secondary readiness, and increasing graduation rates. Every CCRPI component and indicator was selected to align to these goals. And those components are content mastery, progress, closing gaps, readiness, and graduation rate. Content mastery is about achievement. It measures whether students are achieving at the level necessary to be prepared for the next grade, college, or career. The indicators include achievement in English language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies. Behind every CCRPI component and indicator are a series of business rules designed to ensure that the accountability scores are valid, consistent, and comply with legislative requirements, while accounting for the complexity and nuances of the data to ensure fair and appropriate calculations. For example, content mastery scores are weighted based on level of achievement to acknowledge the level of proficiency students demonstrate and to ensure that achievement across the continuum is recognized. Progress is about growth. It measures how much growth students demonstrate from one school year to the next. Indicators include growth in English language arts and math, and progress towards English language proficiency for English learners. As with content mastery, progress scores are weighted based on the level of growth demonstrated. While students at any achievement level can demonstrate all levels of growth, a business rule awards full progress points to distinguished learners in recognition of the exceptional level of proficiency that they have attained. Closing gaps is about achievement gap closure. It sets the expectation that all subgroups make annual improvements in achievement rates or maintain high levels of achievement. The extent to which all subgroups meet annual 3% improvement targets is measured for ELA, math, science, and social studies. Measuring achievement gaps is absolutely the most challenging aspect of accountability because it requires balancing multiple priorities, setting federally required targets that are ambitious yet attainable, ensuring fairness across subgroups and schools, recognizing subgroup progress even when targets are not met, avoiding unintended incentives that reward declines among high-performing groups, and providing results that are transparent and meaningful to educators and the public. The current closing gaps component was intentionally designed to balance these competing priorities as thoughtfully and fairly as possible. For example, targets are calculated individually for each subgroup in each school based on prior achievement, creating attainable expectations for annual improvement while recognizing that different groups start from different places. Since improvement expectations are always relative to a subgroup's previous year's achievement, if a subgroup declines one year, they do not have a higher hill to climb the next. Then, so as to not penalize high-performing subgroups, they are expected to maintain strong performance rather than improve further. And because each subgroup is measured against its own target rather than against another group, schools cannot improve their closing gaps results by allowing higher achieving groups to decline. While the current model is not perfect, any changes to how we measure achievement gaps, we want to carefully consider, just to ensure that we avoid some of these unintended consequences and that we preserve the goal of supporting meaningful progress for all subgroups. And then readiness is about preparation for future success. The readiness component includes additional measures of college and career readiness aligned with our state's priorities. Readiness indicators reflect Georgia's commitment to preparing students for success after high school. They encompass literacy, attendance, access to well-rounded and accelerated coursework, pathway completion, and demonstrations of college, career, or military readiness, aligning with statewide priorities such as the Georgia Early Literacy Act, reducing chronic absenteeism, expanding career education and computer science opportunities, and promoting high-demand career pathways. And then the graduation rate component includes both the 4- and 5-year adjusted cohort graduation rates, which are the number of students who graduate from high school in 4 or 5 years with a regular or alternate high school diploma, divided by the number of students who form the adjusted cohort for that graduating class. As legislators, I'm sure you get lots of questions about the CCRPI timeline, and that absolutely came up today already. CCRPI does take time, because it's built on a large volume of data collected throughout the school year and the following summer, with dedicated review periods for districts to verify and finalize their data submissions. Drawing on more than 120 data elements from 18 sources, the information we need to calculate CCRPI is not available in full until September. We then calculate 44 indicators and 5 components across grade bands using records for over 1.7 million students at more than 2,000 schools across the state, employing extensive validation and quality assurance procedures to ensure accurate results. As my colleagues mentioned, it's important to note that while we do not publicly release CCRPI until the fall, schools are not waiting for CCRPI to understand performance. Because schools and districts submit much of the data used in accountability, they have access to those data first. Preliminary student assessment results are available within days of spring testing, and other accountability-related data are accessible throughout the summer, enabling local leaders to analyze results, make informed decisions, and take action before CCRPI is released. The CCRPI reports, including the Governor's Office of Education and Workforce Development's overall score, are publicly available through an interactive dashboard. The school climate star rating is also provided on CCRPI reports. However, the rating does not inform CCRPI scores. It's informational only.
I'm just going to pause right there. Representative Silcox has a question.
I was just curious, would there be a way that you think that you could calculate the data earlier than September?
Yeah, it's one of those things that just requires conversation and trade-offs. For example, districts have always wanted us to use their summer assessment retest scores, which is why I don't have the assessment data statewide to begin calculations until September. Similarly, for graduation rate calculations, we include summer graduates who count towards that rate. Districts also have an opportunity to give us updated withdrawal reasons, so we know if we can, remove students from the cohort. All of that work happens throughout the summer, and it's not until September where we start calculating. So we absolutely could, but it would require some conversation and changes about what data we use, what business rules we use. For example, we would have to not include a lot of that summer data if we wanted to start calculations in June.
Interesting, thank you.
Yeah.
Representative Rice.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Just underscoring what Representative Silcox asked and what was mentioned earlier today, Texas is a large state, and they're able to do this. And I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate your presentation. But, we're here serving on the committee trying to get answers on how we can get this information, how we can get it sooner to our schools and sooner for implementation so that the discussion isn't a year, 18 months after the testing takes place. So, like I said, if Texas can do it in this amount of time, I think it's something that Georgia could do. What would you say would be the first steps in resolving that particular issue?
Yeah, and I can't speak specifically to Texas, but I do know a lot of states that release their results earlier do not do the data validation processes we do in Georgia. So for example, we match our assessment data to student record, and districts have an opportunity to clean up some of that data. If the wrong student name was on the wrong test record, et cetera, they can clean that up. We also use all of the summer assessment scores and summer graduates. So if we wanted to not employ some of those processes, not use the summer data, we could be in a position where we start calculating as soon as the school year ends.
Yes, because is there any chance that the complexity that you're speaking of, the detriment outweighs the benefits in that complexity if we're not getting the results till later?
I think it's an excellent question. It's a conversation broader than me. It would include policymakers, absolutely the districts, as to how important including some of that data versus getting the results earlier. We would very much need their input.
Hey, Representative Donna Tucci.
Yes. So with the summer assessments and the summer graduations, if those were added to the following year, would there just be the 1 year that it's going to be a significant data bit of information, or is that a challenge to move them? What difference would those make in terms of how you set up the following year?
Yeah, so federal law dictates how we calculate the adjusted cohort graduation rate. It's actually highly regulated. We do not have to include summer graduates. It allows us to include summer graduates. We could choose not to and get it out earlier. One thing I can offer is Georgia's actually one of the earliest states to release graduation rates. You may be hearing about other states releasing graduation rates right now. That's last year's 2025 data. They are a full year behind on graduation rates. We released our 2025 graduation rates last September.
So it sounds like they moved their summer assessment to the following year instead of waiting for it at the end of the year.
The whole indicator's lagging.
Okay.
So,
okay.
so they're not taking the summer kids and adding them to the next year. So, for example, the end of this September, we will release our 2026 graduation rates. Other states are just now releasing their 2025 graduation rates.
Okay, Representative Hagan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When you were responding to Vice Chair Rice's previous question about releasing information earlier, I was just curious. You mentioned having time to check the data to make sure you had the right test scores for the right student. How would that be a problem? Are they not correctly putting their name on the test? Will you explain to me so I can understand what data are we aligning with the records, and why would that cause a significant delay in getting that information released?
Occasionally that specific thing does happen, but what is mainly happening is, we get our assessment file from the assessment that has all the students and the assessment scores in it, and then we run a statewide longitudinal data system where districts are providing us with all of the other information about students, right? Their course enrollments, their demographic information, a lot of the other things we use. So when we get our assessment file, we match it to the student record file, right? Using students' identifiers, names, etc. We can't always do that with a pure computer match, is what we call it. Sometimes there's a little bit of misalignment, right? The student name may have been spelt a little differently on the assessment than it was in the official student record. So we put all of that doesn't match into an application for districts to go in and fix to make sure we've attached the right students' assessment data to the rest of their educational record. And they have an opportunity in the summer to do that. They also, along with that, we have a non-participation calculation or application. Federal law requires at least 95% of students participate in assessments, and if they don't, we have to account for that in accountability scores. There are some legitimate reasons that a student would not participate, so districts have that opportunity once the school year ends to give us those reasons. For example, students enrolled in some AP courses do not have to take the EOC. So it gives them the opportunity. All I know is that the student was enrolled in the course and I'm expecting a test score. They have the opportunity to tell us, no, that student was, doing it through dual enrollment or something that for which they were exempt. So those are some of the processes happening in the summer.
Thank you.
And I will just add briefly, there's also other data we use that I can't get until later. For example, the TCSG Dual Achieve program in state law now, where students can withdraw from high school and finish their high school diploma at TCSG. For me to pull those students out of graduation rates, I wait on a file from TCSG to tell me these students enrolled with us. So yes, you can take them out. I don't get a lot of that data until August and September as well.
Representative Silcox.
I'll wait.
Okay. Who's number 7? Is that you? Representative Lupton? Hang on, let me. There. Okay.
Thank you, Chairwoman. We've put we've harshed your buzz a little bit here by stopping you just before the end of your presentation. But if I can go back a little bit to a question on the Closing the Gaps measure, because we spoke a lot about this and how volatile it is. We received a lot of information about that at our first meeting. And what I'm hearing you say is literally directly opposite of what we heard, which is that when you're calculating this score, if one subset has a great achievement, like they've done really well, that cohort of students is not compared to itself the next year. Another cohort of students comes in, and if they even improve where they were but don't improve as much as the group in front of them, the school is docked because that achievement is not quote unquote sustained when you're not comparing the same students to the same students. Is that not how this works?
I think that's true. So for a school, we calculate those content mastery achievement scores, not just for all students, but each individual student group. And then for Closing Gaps, the annual improvement target is 3% of the gap between the baseline and 90%, right? So for every individual subgroup and school in the state, that annual improvement amount is going to range from basically 0 to 2.7 points. That would be the maximum if you had a subgroup at 0% proficiency, for example. So then for all of those groups, you can see an example of the flags here. Using the upcoming CCRPI in 2026 as an example, if a subgroup's target was 1.2, we'll look at their 25 achievement score and see is their 26 achievement score at least 1.2 points greater. And then if it is, green flag. If they improved but didn't hit the target, it's a yellow and they get partial points. And then if the subgroup declined in performance, they get the red flag, and that's where there's 0 points.
Right. And I think the concerns that we were hearing was if there's a big jump one year because a big investment was made and a school makes a larger than expected jump, the next year, if the school still does better than it did the first year before it made that lump, it's to its detriment, even though it's overall doing better. It's getting docked because they didn't improve 3 times, but they doubled their achievement. That's what we were hearing.
Yes, and that's absolutely true. It's part of the complexity of trying to come up with a measure like this, because on the flip side, the way the current measure is, if a school declines one year, they'll get the red flag that year, but then the next year we're looking at where they ended up, right? We're not expecting them to make up the decline, then another jump. So it is absolutely a challenging metric and something that we could probably spend days meeting with everyone and trying to work out all the details.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, Representative Elallier, and then we will let you finish.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Timberlake, I appreciate the presentation. I want to go back to the data validation. I know Chair Ladies Rice and Hagan brought this up. Is the deviation between the kind of post data validated report that much more significant than what you would put out before the data validation process? And the reason why I asked that, and Chair Lady Rice was kind of pressing on this point, there's such a premium and a value to getting that information earlier for parents, for educators, school leaders. And if the difference between the two is marginal, then why not just get it out as soon as possible with an asterisk, and then update it once you have the data validation process completed. In your experience, is there much difference between the pre and the post?
It's an excellent question. Some of it is corrections and cleanup, but a lot of it would substantively change the calculations. I'll give you an example with graduation rate. So we can remove students from the cohort for certain reasons. They transfer to another state, they transfer out of country. There's a couple of other reasons. A lot of times when students leave school in 9th grade or 10th grade, the district may not have that information yet. So this process we do now in the summer after that cohort graduates allows them to give us the withdrawal information they have since obtained, in the 2-3 years since the student left the school. If we did not do that at first and did graduation rates, they would actually look quite a bit different than when we finally get the additional information from districts on those withdrawal reasons. My concern would be, we all know, no matter how we use CCRPI results, probably the largest accountability, high-stakes consequence is public perception, right? So the second we publicly release any data, even if it's preliminary, even if I can articulate what's missing and what's not in there and tell you that scores are going to go up later, the damage has been done. Okay. The public has seen that data, the press has seen it. That's where decisions will be made based on that data, and then districts' abilities later to articulate the good work they're doing with the final data would be impacted by that.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm almost done. Oops, I had one slide left. There we go. I just wanted to leave you with a few guiding principles for accountability. As I mentioned, I've been doing accountability and assessment in Georgia for over 15 years now. And I've learned that people rarely call about whether accountability is important. Right, they are calling about what should count, how it should be measured, and how the results should be used. And they're absolutely going to call about all those unique situations, the individual student whose path looked a little different, whose data looks a little different, and how they're handled in the calculations, which is part of our lengthy list of business rules for handling all of these nuances. I've had the privilege of having these conversations with stakeholders across Georgia, learning about accountability systems in other states, and watching our own system evolve through multiple federal laws, state initiatives, and redesign efforts. And through those experiences, I've learned that accountability systems are most effective when they remain focused on a few fundamental principles. Obviously, they must comply with state and federal law. They must reflect our state's priorities. They must be fair, transparent, and technically sound. And they need to be able to drive continuous improvement. And they must provide meaningful information that educators, families, communities, and policymakers can actually use. I've also learned what doesn't work. Systems become less effective when they mistake what is easy to measure for what matters most, when they are so complex no one understands them, when they incentivize changes in data reporting rather than changes in practice, when they reward quick fixes to earn points over sustained improvements to benefit students, and when they fail to account for the diverse ways that schools serve their students and communities. Camden County High School, Davidson Fine Arts Magnet School, and Phoenix High School, along with every other school in the state, may look very different, serve different students, and pursue different missions. But each should be accountable for ensuring that students learn, grow, and graduate prepared for what comes next. The challenge is implementing an accountability system that satisfies this complex set of statutory, technical, and policy requirements while preserving what makes each school unique and maintaining a clear focus on the outcomes that matter most for every student in Georgia. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I'm happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. And you and I didn't get to talk beforehand, but I'm going to read you the email that I sent to our liaison at the Department of Education for what I wanted you to say today. What changes has Godot made to CCRPI over the years? Be prepared to discuss each change and the justification for making that change. What impact did that change have on scores and/or school district satisfaction?
Yes, ma'am. Let me come back to this and highlight that again.
No, we saw that. I wanted a list of years, then the change, and I wanted that to be your whole presentation.
Oh, okay.
Because we've done kind of all this history stuff. We've heard that last time. I wanted you to literally walk us through each change. So if you could get that in a very, like a nice spreadsheet, the year, the change that was made, what happened. If you could get that for us, that would be fabulous, and then I can pass that out to the committee. You can just email that to me and to Andrew.
Absolutely.
Representative Rice.
Thank you. One more question. I like that you ended on the accountability. We worked last session passing accountability on our Teacher Preparation Act for our teacher prep programs. And going through on this accountability, we heard earlier on some frustration on not having all the information in one location. So when we're talking about accountability as leaders in schools and superintendents and administrators are looking to reach those accountability measures, it sounds, what I heard is it sounds like it's very difficult when the information is so scattered or pieced together, and it seems that the request this morning is that we have one location where that would be easily accessible. Is that something that has been brought to you, and is that something that the Department of Ed can look at? That seems like an easy fix. There's a lot of things that we're talking about. We've used the word complex a lot today, complexity. That's not a real complex request, but I would like to advocate for seeing something like that.
Absolutely. And as my colleagues mentioned earlier, some state requirements give certain tasks to the department, some to the governor's office of education and workforce strategy, and we work with them as closely as we can, but of course we're happy to have any conversations about how that works.
But would that look like potentially like a website where the different groups, their information can be poured into one place for access for these leaders?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely something we could work with them on.
Thank you.
Representative Donatucci.
Yes, so at the beginning, Chair Lady Ballard said that we can't lose sight of all of these statistics represent a child. Mm-hmm. And when we go through it, can a parent track their child's progression from start to finish so they see that their child has declined? Can they see all of that?
Yes. So in terms of just assessment scores, of course, they're always, getting their assessment scores every year. They have access to all of their information, through the school. It's the conversations they have with school about attendance and the courses that they're taking. They get all of the information back.
But not through anything with the CCRPI?
No. CCRPI is focused as a school accountability measure. It's not individual students to where we would provide anything back to students.
Any other questions? Okay. Oh, nope. Oh, are you still blinking?
Trying to go off.
Okay. This board does not like the on-off clicking. Thank you so much. Finally, for today, we are going to welcome Christy Hovanet. Is that the correct pronunciation? Okay. From Excel in Ed. They're a national group, so I thought it would be beneficial to hear kind of a national perspective, kind of get a different kind of overview. And she's going to talk to us about progress and content mastery component.
Really see everybody. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come and talk to you today. I wish I could see everybody. I don't know if I can do this. Come and talk to you today. I'm with Excel in Ed. I'm a former assistant commissioner of education. I've been with Excel in Ed for about 18 years. I've worked in just about every state in the country on assessment and accountability issues, and love this conversation here today, and also the fact that I think it was Pink Day at the Capitol. But whenever we start talking about accountability, we get really, 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 really fast and want to just bring it back up to the very high level. These accountability systems in and of themselves do absolutely nothing to improve student outcomes. It's the actions that we take based on this data and us collectively that really shows what we can do if we understand the data. So I try and keep that in mind whenever I talk about the accountability system. This is one really small piece of it. Georgia educators have already done a massive job of setting the standards of what students should know and be able to do in every grade and subject, to be able to measure that with the assessments. All we're doing is taking that assessment data and information and putting it together to be able to report out how well schools are doing and subsequently be able to provide that school improvement and the supports that they need in order to get the outcomes that we desire. So again, just keeping in mind that the whole purpose of school accountability is simply to make sure all of the kids learn the standards we expect of them. And if they're not, how do we support them so that they will moving forward? That said, accountability is super complex, but easily managed and done. One of the things I also like to do in these presentations is we hear all the time from educators. They're the main consumers of this information. However, the public and policymakers and general Americans also are as well. So would just like to share some polling data. This is not a poll that we did, but an organization called Up One Insights did this work. You are on very firm grounds and standings that accountability and assessments are still extraordinarily important as a way to level the playing field and make sure that all kids get the education that they deserve. 9 out of 10 Americans believe kids should be tested every year and make sure that they're on grade level and that schools are held accountable for making sure they're doing their job and we're getting our return on taxpayer investments. So despite some of the things that you might hear from constituents or others that we need to change the systems or we shouldn't be testing or holding schools accountable, make sure that we bring it back to the larger group as a whole. It's not just educators that are consumers of this information. It's, the general public. When you're looking to design your accountability system, we asked, or Up One Insights asked the general American public, what's the best indicator that a school is good or high performing? Tell us the 2 things that you're looking for or are interested in seeing in your accountability system, or that would indicate that this is a good school. And you can see overwhelmingly, people want to know, are students performing at grade level? Are they making academic growth over time? Are they graduating on time? And are they ready for what comes after high school? Everything else is a very distant second, third, fourth. They're very concerned about academics because that's the core function of schools and our institutions. So know that including measures of progress and achievement as well as graduation should be the core focus of your accountability calculation.
We do have a quick question, Representative Silcox.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just curious, I know you look at all of this in the United States. Do you look at it internationally as well?
We have not done a lot of work internationally.
The reason I ask is there's always these statistics that say, well, the U.S. is falling behind. It's, 100 in math or whatever compared to all these other countries. And so I'm like, wow, are we just not competitive? Or it sounds like maybe you don't know.
But we still remain competitive. There are a number of different benchmarks from the TIMSS and PEARLS and PISA that measure student performance and outcomes. It's usually every 4 years to look at whether students in the U.S. are continuing to be competitive in math and English. And while our rankings are not as high as they have been for the OECD or the economically developed countries, we're still holding our own ground. We're not number 1 in the world by any means, but it's looking at, if you would like the data, I can provide you all the rankings.
Sure.
We're not as high as we were.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So still need to focus on outcomes. And with that in mind, too, we always need to know what those data are telling us. And the first overall initial impression when doing the polling, they said the best way to determine whether a school is high or low performing is to be able to look at whether or not they're an A through F letter grade. All of the other descriptive labels or 0 to 100 labels aren't as understandable to the general public and really interested in seeing something that's very clear and obvious. So we've heard, make it more clear, easy, earlier, and more fair. For your accountability systems, this is one of the ways to make it more clear what is happening in a school. We've been working in school accountability for over 26 years, and we've come up with a lot of fundamental principles that generally good accountability systems encompass. First one, also resonant with public opinion, is that you use clear, transparent descriptors. That it is very obvious from the outset whether a school is higher or lower performing, and there's a way to dig down and look at that information. We also want to make sure that we have clear, concise learning outcome measures, that we're focused on outcomes and focused on whether or not students are achieving them in an objective way, so looking at assessment data. We also want to balance progress and proficiency. We talked about that a little, you heard a little bit about that earlier. What's the focus on achievement versus the focus on progress? We generally like to see things balanced in elementary and middle school with a little more focus on achievement once you get to high school, given that they're going to be graduating and need those success skills when they leave high school. This is a big one. We want to make sure that we're calculating student progress towards grade level or advanced achievement. We want to make sure that the system is looking at whether or not students are getting closer to being proficient rather than just performing better than their peers. The way the CCRPI is set up right now, it's looking at comparison to peer performance rather than comparison to making progress towards grade level expectations. The next one is looking at the progress of the lowest performing students in the school. We've heard a lot about closing the gaps over the last 2 meetings. This indicator would look, instead of at each individual subgroup, which may or may not be present at a school, but focuses the attention on the lowest performing students in the school from the prior year. So it'd be looking at achievement levels from students last year and indicating that they're the lowest performing among the school this year, and looking to see whether they're making progress towards grade level proficiency. This has significantly narrowed gaps in multiple states that it's currently in use, including Mississippi and Florida. There are other states that also incorporate this indicator that's been newly incorporated into their systems that are seeing the same types of impact. Part of the reason for including an indicator like this instead of the student group closing the gap indicator is because every single school has a low 25%, and we're actually focusing on the lowest performing students rather than just student groups that might or might not be present in that school.
Representative Silcox.
You mentioned Mississippi, and it grabbed my attention because we have just passed this past year a huge literacy bill you may be familiar with to put literacy coaches into the schools, which I'm thrilled about. And I guess I'm curious, have you seen in those other states, Alabama, Mississippi, our competitors that have instituted the literacy coaches, have you seen major progress with that lowest group of students?
We have.
Great.
However, we also implemented the school accountability system predating any of those literacy pieces. So I've worked in Mississippi for the past 14 years with their State Department of Education to craft and create their school accountability calculation. And one of the initial pieces that they put in there was a low performing 25% of students making progress in reading. So there they started with getting the data and seeing that they did not have students who were low performing making progress or improvements, which prompted the Literacy-Based Promotion Act in Mississippi in 2013. So it all started with the data to be able to develop those policies and programs and instructional supports. And yes, they are seeing a narrowing of the achievement gap. And right now it is better to be a Black, brown, or low-income student in Mississippi than just about anywhere else in the country if you want to learn how to read.
That's fabulous. So what you're saying is they actually had their formula measuring against grade level or grade achievement versus peers.
Correct.
From the very beginning.
Yes, ma'am.
So we probably need to think about that. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Sure. We've also talked about reporting results as close to the end of the school year as possible to make sure that these results can be used not just for people making decisions about where to buy their homes, but also for educators to figure out what professional development is needed, how to re-resource the schools, make sure the right materials are in place. But we want those results released as close to the end of the school year as possible. We've heard a lot of trade-offs about what it would take to get school accountability results out earlier. I ran the school accountability calculation in Florida in the early 2000s. Florida still releases their results at the beginning of July. So you just have to make some trade-offs on, are you willing to use a lagging graduation rate indicator for your high school accountability system in order to get results out before the beginning of the next school year to make some decisions. And also, as you're looking at other states to figure out when they're releasing accountability calculations, also know that school start dates vary greatly across the country. So my home state of Minnesota doesn't start until after Labor Day. My current state of Florida has been in full swing for the last 2 weeks for school. So just having the date of when they're released isn't going to provide everything you need. We just did a 50-state analysis of when states release results and how long of a time it is between when school starts and when the results are released. I think there's only a handful of states that release it before the end of the school year. So that's a big push and prompt for us to make sure that this information is getting out a lot faster, because it gets forgotten about once school year starts, really gets going and started. We also need to be able to clearly communicate this information to parents so they can make better decisions about their student outcomes. And again, even if you have all the best inclusion things in your accountability calculation, if you don't have a rigorous expectation about what it means to be a high-performing or a good school, you really just kind of lose everything. Everything just becomes average or not really understandable. And then most importantly, we have to use those pieces of information in order to drive recognition, intervention, and support. So being able to really push things forward there. Selecting school accountability indicators, these are the questions I ask when I'm trying to decide, is it an appropriate indicator to include in a school accountability system? If you don't remember any of the other questions on here, the first one is the most important. Is this outcome meaningful to a student? So if it's not meaningful to a student, schools should not be getting credit for it. So thinking about, are you performing better than me on your state assessment? That might not be very meaningful to you because I'm not doing very well. So making sure that that outcome is meaningful. You're measuring towards grade level performance. Is graduating in 5 years meaningful? For some kids it might be, but we really aspire for all kids to graduate in 4 years. So that's far more meaningful to the student. It doesn't let the school off the hook for saying, oh, they're close, but we have another year and they'll still count it in accountability. It's making sure that whatever the outcome is something that's meaningful and purposeful to the student. Is the student on grade level? Are they graduating in 4 years? If they're not proficient, are they making progress towards proficiency? So every time you think about, should we include this indicator in CCRPI, think about what that means for the student. And if it's not a good outcome for the student, don't include it in your system.
Representative Silcox.
Sorry, I'm just way too interested in this. So is it reasonable to say that if it's meaningful to the student, that perhaps there is a time where the administrators or a teacher will sit down with them and say, you know, kind of like a conference, right, with the parents, without the parents, either way, you know, this is what the students that are, you know, proficient are making, this is what you're doing. Because that was never communicated to me in school. And I went to Georgia schools all my life. So that, to me, would have been very meaningful. Thank you.
Yes. Representative Lepton, are you sick? No. Okay. Representative Crawford, I can't keep your numbers straight down there.
No problem at all. I don't know if this mic can get any closer. I think we're okay.
Lean in, lean in.
Lean in a
We
little
can
bit.
hear you.
Okay. Mic check. I had a question on one of the previous slides. It was discussing intervention and support of our schools. My question is more so when you have school districts and they're diverse and there are different needs within that school district, how does the state intervene in the support? And how do you make the distinction between what the state can and cannot do versus what the local school board, how are you leaning on them for support?
That's a great question. The first thing I would ask is, why is a school being identified for support? So if they are being identified because they have a very small percentage of students who are reading on grade level, then I think the state has a pretty substantial role in what they can do for the school, such as prescribing which curriculum should be used in the school, whether or not a reading coach needs to be funded for that school, whether or not you have to teach 90 minutes of uninterrupted block for reading in that school. So I think it really depends on why the school was identified for support, and then match those interventions with the support. This is getting a little bit off topic, but because you asked the question. When I think of supports and interventions, I don't think of them as something you do in addition to. I think it needs to be a cultural shift in the school where if you are eligible for supports and intervention, and you're not just buying a supplemental tutoring program to lay on top of your core curriculum. You're actually pulling back and saying, does this core curriculum for reading actually teach the science of reading? Are we looking at all of those components? Do the intervention materials for students who are struggling align with that core curriculum so there's coherence in the instruction? You're not jumping around from thing to thing. It's not something that you lay on top of it. It's something that gets embedded into the culture of that school.
Thank you.
My pleasure. So other things we're looking at when selecting accountability indicators, obviously they have to be valid. They're measuring what we think they're measuring. Reliable, they measure the same thing over time, and accurate. We need some way to verify that the data that we're getting is true and correct. We also want to make sure it's related to student achievement. We saw that first slide of public opinion. Those things are important and provide a full composite of what the school looks like. They are not as important as making sure students are reading on grade level and making progress towards grade level and graduating on time. We also need those indicators to differentiate among schools. It's one of the main tenets of the federal law. You don't want an indicator in your system where everybody earns all the points or nobody earns any of the points. You want a nice differentiation that really shows that this indicator is providing information about the school and what's happening for students in that school. You also have to be careful of perverse incentives that may arise if you include specific indicators. So for example, if you want to include something like student discipline, you might in fact be creating a more dangerous environment in schools because you are not having schools and students suspended for behavior, therefore having the exact opposite effect of what you're trying to do to create a safer school. So just think about how whatever you add to your system, how the behavior is going to change or how things are going to be reported differently in order to earn those points. And then you don't want too many indicators in your accountability system. If you keep adding indicators, every single indicator becomes less and less important. So really focus on the ones that are important and make those the bulk of your calculation. Obviously, you have to only measure things that are under the school's control. You don't want to measure things like teacher salary, generally not under their control. And making sure that if you're collecting new information, that the administrative burden on the districts for collecting that information doesn't outweigh the information you're actually getting. And then obviously align to your overall policy goals. But if you don't remember any of these, just go back to the first one is this a meaningful outcome for students? And if it's not, don't include it in your system and schools shouldn't earn points for it. when we talk about being clear and transparent, I just pulled this. This is the border school closest to me in Florida. I was trying to figure out, is this a good school? It's a green box around it. Green's positive. I like green. We know it's 0 to 100, but maybe not everyone does. But I couldn't really tell if this was a good school or not. So had to do a lot more investigation and work to realize that this middle school was actually performing well below the state average, which is fine. But as a user, going and seeing a 70.7, and I know it's out of, if I knew it was out of a 100-point scale, which isn't specified down here anywhere, I think that this was kind of an average or decent school. If there was a different letter grade associated with this, I'd have a better idea that this was maybe a lower performing school. So if you're looking for something to be more clear, providing some context about what these numeric values actually represents is really important. Otherwise, you just don't have a good context about it. Same middle school, looked at content mastery. And I was like, 53.9. Not exactly sure what that represents. So did some digging and investigating. Is that good or isn't it good? Saw that it's all of the subjects combined together for that overall score. And you get points for being below grade level. You get bonus points for being above grade level. And it comes out to a score. But I'm really like, well, is this good? What percent of kids are proficient? More than half. So I couldn't really get a clear answer about what was actually happening in that school. Is it really high performing and some low performing, or everybody's just average? The report card does go further to tell you what the proficiency rates are at the school. So the school has about 33% of kids proficient in ELA, and significantly more proficient in math. But again, if you're looking for transparency and easy to understand calculations, combining indexes and combining subjects doesn't provide you a lot of context for, does the school need support in reading, or does the school need support in math, or are we having a challenge with graduation, or we're just not preparing kids for what comes next. So made a whole bunch of suggestions based on the principles, based on public opinion, based on what people want to see in accountability systems. And you have a separate, I think, handout that Andrew printed with all of these suggestions and recommendations. But if you're really looking for clear, fair, earlier, a lot of these things can help do that. The more easily calculated your indicators are, the more easily people are going to understand them, and the faster they can be done. So instead of a 0 to 100 summative rating that's not categorized in any way, put an A through F on it. Give people some context about whether or not it's a good school. Instead of the content mastery being an index score that combines all of the subjects and awards points across the spectrum of achievement, just look at what percent of kids are proficient in a school. Looking at the progress for measuring growth, instead of measuring relative to peers, like are you performing better than me or not, compare it to whether you are making growth or the student is making growth towards grade level proficiency or mastery. Instead of looking at closing the gaps, which targets change on an annual basis, look at the lowest performing students in every school. That ensures that you're really capturing, focusing on those lowest performing kids and the kids that actually truly need help, and making sure that there's not just a focus on kids that you can get close to being above proficient. And minimally, if you keep the closing the gap calculation, at least do it to 100%. I don't want to write off 10% of kids right from the start. So instead of that 90% expectation for closing the gap, at least make it 100%. And then the readiness calculation, pretty decent readiness calculation, or pretty decent things being measured in the readiness calculation, but we're only basing it on 12th grade students. There are a lot of kids that fall out between 9th grade and 12th grade but the denominator has shrunken to be just 12th grade kids, it should be the denominator of the whole graduation cohort. In some states, and I didn't check to see how many in Georgia this would be, but you can have a really, really low graduation rate of, 65, 70%, but 90% of kids are college and career ready, because you're looking at only the kids that did successfully make it to 12th grade, not all of the kids in that school. And that gives a little bit misleading picture that says, oh, everybody at this school is college and career ready, but a whole bunch of kids didn't even make it to 12th grade to be included in that calculation to begin with. Graduation rate, again, focusing on the 4-year rate, it's aspirational but yet attainable. It's what's been typical for high school, really focusing on making sure we have something that's meaningful to kids, not keeping them there for an extra year if they're right on the cusp. And reporting, you can speed up reporting, as we've heard. Again, it's just trade-offs. Fortunately, results come out a little bit earlier. Districts, I heard, had them in May, but publicly released in April. But not having CCRPI results or accountability results until November makes it really tough for districts to act, or for the state to develop new policies, or even for you all to think through good policy decisions, given that it's August and we don't know what to do for next year yet. And then school identification, right now it's based on a normative rank, so it's looking at just those bottom 5% of Title I schools. I'd encourage you to look at all schools when you're identifying schools for support, not just the lowest percentage of them. The expectations should be really ratcheted up, and state can and should probably be more directive on what those schools need to be doing in order to improve. So these suggestions are all in a separate handout paper with resource links and stuff if you're interested in looking at it. Again, criterion and norm, this is an easy one to change. Looking at criterion-based growth, it's like you're weighing yourself, so you know exactly how much we weigh. Normative growth, it's on a balance. Do you weigh more or less than somebody that you're being compared to? So that's how I think of it when I'm looking at it. And then all the characteristics of the different growth models. We really group growth into 2 big buckets: criterion-based growth and norm-referenced growth. A lot of advantages to criterion-based growth in addition to measuring each individual student towards grade level mastery. But generally, educators can replicate a criterion-based growth calculation. They cannot replicate SGP. Requires individual student level data and deep understanding of statistics, as well as the actual formula that the state uses. And the expectations for normative growth aren't known until after the test is given and after the school year is over. Criterion-based expectations are set ahead of time and known. And then the one thing that always is funny to me is there are a lot of people that really support criterion or normative-based growth, but it guarantees the same distribution of growth every year. So no matter what, it's a zero-sum game, and not all students can demonstrate growth under these normative models. Only 2/3 of them maximum, if they're either meeting or maxing out growth, can actually make or demonstrate growth. With criterion-based growth, there's the potential that every student can demonstrate growth, not just a certain percentage. And you can also look time over time whether or not you're improving the percent of students making growth or not, compared to normative models, which the distribution remains the same no matter what. Yeah. And then the obviously most important thing about criterion-based growth is if students make growth every year, eventually they'll reach proficiency. That's not necessarily the case with the normative models. Those expectations change every year and doesn't guarantee you anything close to mastery. So looking at just the simplicity of a calculation, looking at it as what percent of students have done something. So what percent of students are proficient in ELA, proficient in math, science, social studies, what percent of kids are demonstrating college ready, and looking at the percentage of students so you have a clear understanding of half the kids can do it or they can't, 1/3 of the kids or a quarter of the kids. And looking at very simple reporting metrics, what percent of kids are making progress towards meeting grade level in ELA, what percent of kids in the lowest quartile are making progress towards meeting those things. So trying to simplify this all into what percent of kids are doing something, and retaining that balance between growth and proficiency is really important moving forward. So ultimately, we want all kids to be on grade level. We know in reality that they aren't, but we need to make sure we're continuously measuring it until they are. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And one thing, the slide where you talked about the kind of the unintended consequences of what we're measuring, I have seen that at home and through peers of my children. I mean, since, you know, we do measure on graduation rate, well, my goodness, we're going to make sure all those kids graduate, which is a worthy goal. However, we have sacrificed a lot of accountability for students. Due dates are pretty much non-existent. Work can be turned in whenever you take a notion. And I want, we also, in this committee, we're talking about workforce retention. I want you to imagine you are a high school teacher. You have 150 students, and your due dates have been ignored all semester, and you're getting 150 kids worth of work dumped on you right before final exams, and you've got to grade all that. And you're not allowed to put due dates on your kids. I tried with my son in 9th grade, like, please do not accept late work from this child. I was told that that was not a thing. They could not abide by my wishes, so it was a fun time. We've overcome that, but I think what we're seeing is that unintended consequence, and what in reality it is doing, it is affecting kids when they go to college. Because they've lived 4 years with no due dates, and all of a sudden they're expecting to be adults and be treated as adults in that college setting, and it's hard. And so I that really caught my eye. She's nodding and smiling. Representative Rice.
Thank you very much. Mine is not a question. This is more of a comment. I love Excel and Ed. You equip us so well when we go to the conferences and everything you do. And hitting on that word again, complexity that we have mentioned several times. I appreciate, and I think I speak for all my community members, we're going to be poring over these slides because the simplicity of what you just presented puts wind in my sails. Like I see hope for students. I see progress, and I just want to say thank you for that.
Thank you. Okay, any more questions? Any more questions? Okay, thank you so much for coming. Committee members, we have a lunch in room 514 over in CLOB. I think we've got it from Kava. And that was brought to us today by our friends at Page. So thank them when you see them. Thank y'all so much for coming and for participating. We appreciate all the interest in this committee, and we are adjourned.
You have to know where to go. It's not. I'll send you the link.